New York State Libertarian Convention. I want to thank all of you who were here this morning, and I want to reiterate our gratitude to the Hudson Valley chapter for securing this excellent location, for organizing. There's a tremendous amount of work that Gary and Bob and Tom and Jan and Earl and Donald have done. This is not something that happens overnight. It's not something that can be put together in a heartbeat. If you want to see those, come to Manhattan. You see our low-tech operations at the Ukrainian. But in any event, our gratitude to the members of the Hudson Valley chapter for all of their fine work to put this together. We have a number of excellent speakers this afternoon, the first of whom is Jason Sorens, who's sitting to my left, and Jason will be speaking with us in a couple of minutes. What I wanted to use these few moments, though, to do is to remind you to avail yourself of the opportunity to contribute to the Libertarian Party of New York. At some point, we'll find a nice big hat and pass the hat, or do whatever we can to shake you down, to accept your contribution. Yeah, that's a good hat. It's a red hat, so I don't know if red qualifies, but we'll see. It is a tremendous amount of work for us to petition and get people on the ballot. We do it through a combination of both the use of paid petitioners and individuals on their own. We have people like Mr. Treisman, who handles our technical. And you can see that you notice. And you can see that he's doing a heck of a better job than it would be if I were. Yeah. In any event, very seriously, this is a operation of volunteers. We do hire people to help us with the petitioning, which is an expensive process, but we'll try to do again as much as we can on our own next year. But please, if you do have the ability, make a contribution. You can do it right online, somewhere here, ny.lp.org. So if you have, and at some point too, we're going to get some more T-shirts, and we're going to sell T-shirts because we've had a lot of requests for those. A couple of other quick pointers. We are actively seeking people to run for office. If you want to run for office as a Libertarian in your county, or if you know people who you believe are interested in running, that would be terrific. It is not easy. You need money, you need time, and you need a very thick skin. And but I think that it would be fantastic. We had a dozen candidates last year, and there's no reason that we can't continue in that fine tradition. And we're already gearing up, of course, for 2014. 2014, we're going to run candidates on a statewide basis for governor, lieutenant governor, controller, and attorney general. I don't think there are any Senate seats up, right? The two Senate seats, neither one is up this year, right? So, right, Upchuck is not up for another 2 years. So we will be running candidates for those 4 seats. But if we run the local candidates in a multi-county district, and a good example is, for example, Gigi's going to run for state senate, and her district includes parts of Nassau and Suffolk, then those petitions get filed in Albany at the same time, and we include our candidates for the statewide list. So that is a true benefit and a good way for us to be able to accumulate more signatures, because your signature collections that you're doing on your local campaign will also count towards the state campaign. Last year we submitted 25,000 for the Gary Johnson, Jim Gray, and Chris Eads, who ran for U.S. Senate. Chris is in the corner there. There's no reason we can't do that again next year, particularly if we have lots of local candidates running. So Gary, are we set for the technical stuff now? Okay, great. All right, so we're going to get started with our speaker program. There is still additional food. There's coffee out here. Staff has been exemplary, but if you have any needs or any special requests, I'm sure they're going to help us out. I don't know her name, but this woman here has been terrific for us. And so we'll go from there. We have a number of excellent speakers on various topics, all of which are going to be geared towards changing New York from the evil empire that we know it to be to a conceivably freer state. And the idea of a free state, a state where people actually value individual liberty rather than collectivism, is a concept that we all understand in this room, but is alien to almost everybody else out there in the great sheeple that pull the lever in the voting booths. But there has been a movement for the last decade to try to establish a free state, to get a number of people together to do that, and the place that they're talking about, of course, is New Hampshire, where again it's a smaller population. If we get 50,000 people, 50,000 libertarians, 50,000 freedom lovers move to New Hampshire together and vote together, that could really have an impact on what's going on. Our first speaker has been actively involved in the Free State Project for more than 10 years. Jason Sorens is an assistant professor at SUNY Buffalo. He teaches political science, and he's here today to talk to us about what a free state really would be and what the workings of the Free State Project are and what they see for the future. I give you Jason Sorens.
Thank you very much, and thanks to Gary and the entire NYLP for inviting me. It's a pleasure to be here. I've been voting Libertarian for many years here in New York. I live out in Buffalo. I'm going to start around some brochures here. These brochures are for the Porcupine Freedom Festival, so please take one and pass along. I brought about 100, so there should be some extras at the end. So if you don't mind holding on to those, I will post those around campus, whatever's left. How many of you here have been to PorcFest? No, a few of you have. Okay, quite a few of you. PorcFest has become sort of legendary. It's almost like the Burning Man of the East Coast or something. It's about 1,000 people out in the mountains of northern New Hampshire on a big sprawling campground. All libertarians. We've got Agora Alley, which is this free market marketplace where you can buy untaxed, unregulated food and merchandise and crafts. There was a story on NPR's Planet Money program a couple of years ago, slightly snarky story about how people were buying things in gold and silver, and they bought a T-shirt and it got served to them with a free beer by a 9-year-old. They're not allowing the.
Is there something wrong with that?
Yeah, I guess they thought so.
I never got to go to that one.
Oh, yeah. It's a definitely a unique experience. It's a chance to see what a free society looks like in miniature for a week in June 17 to 23. So please consider joining us there. Porcfest.com. That's PORCFEST.com. I actually will unfortunately not be there this year. I have to be in Spain at that time, but which I regret very much. Yes, unfortunate. Talking about secession. So. Take this off. So the Free State Project started back in 2001, and what I'd like to do today is just give you a brief history of the Free State Project and some updates about where we are now and what's going on in New Hampshire. So it started back in 2001. I was a 24-year-old graduate student at the time and an ardent libertarian, and I'd been frustrated by the last couple of elections. I was active, helped helped an LP congressional candidate back in '96 when I was a college student and donated to the Harry Brown campaigns and everything. And I was disappointed at the electoral results and what was going on in Congress and the Bush presidency and all of that. And wanted to think about a way for libertarians to maximize our ideas and our leverage as purveyors of ideas to actually make a political difference. And it's very hard to do that in a country where we have winner-take-all elections and you have to get 50% of the vote to win. So I was familiar, of course, with some of these previous free nation attempts, from the zany to the bizarre ideas to colonize an atoll in the Pacific or build a floating city in the Caribbean and things like that. And I didn't want to do anything like that. I didn't think that that was going to work. I didn't want anything that would require any large financial outlay. I wanted something that people could just join without having to pay money and have, for some unknown purpose. And so the idea of focusing on a state dovetailed with some of the research I was doing on secession around the world. And I was looking at political parties in Western democracies that want greater autonomy or even independence for their region. So Scotland, Catalonia, the Basque Country, Quebec, places like that. And what I was finding was that governments around the world are actually decentralizing power. There's a trend towards decentralization. The central government transferring more powers to the regional governments. Now, of course, here in the United States, it's gone the other way, right? Since the 1930s at least, we've seen more power concentrated in the federal government. The federal government occupies a greater and greater field of economic regulation, to the point now that the Supreme Court basically says, if it's economic, the federal government can do it. And states are just basically an add-on to that. Well, if that trend that we've seen everywhere else starts coming to the US, it means that state governments in the US will become more important. And they still are important. When you think about important issues like education, land use regulation, state and local taxation, which still represents about 40% of the total tax burden in this country, transportation, all these issues, primarily state and local, occupational licensing. Right? These are issues that libertarians care about. These are issues where we have solutions that people need to hear, and where we can make an obvious difference, a measurable increase in the amount of freedom that we actually feel. So I wrote an essay for an online journal called the Libertarian Enterprise and proposed this idea of a free state project, getting a bunch of libertarians to move to a small state that was already friendly to our ideas to some extent, and that we could push in a freer direction. And about 200 people emailed me in the first couple of weeks after that saying they wanted to sign up. So we got together, we set up a website, we set up a Yahoo club, it was back then, and I don't think those things exist anymore, but and we kind of hammered out the details. So we put together a little statement of intent. What the statement of intent basically says, I've got a few here. Today it says, I hereby state my solemn intent to move, now it says, to the state of New Hampshire. Once there, I will exert the fullest practical effort toward the creation of a society in which the maximum role of civil government is the protection of individuals' life, liberty, and property. So we framed that statement of intent to be simple, straightforward, and big tent. We want anarchists, minarchists, any type of libertarian, whatever you are. If you think that government should be limited or, eliminated completely, where's Eric? Then you're welcome. And the idea was to get 5,000 signatures first, and then have a vote on which state to move to. We didn't want to just decide in advance on a particular place. We wanted to have a full, lengthy conversation about the best place for our efforts. So we focused on 10 smaller states and held a vote, and we allowed people to rank their choices, and we picked the choice that defeated every other choice by a majority. And that was New Hampshire. New Hampshire defeated every other state. The closest state, I believe, was Wyoming. And in the comparison between You vote for Wyoming. The comparison between Wyoming and New Hampshire, I believe, is 58 to 42%. So New Hampshire was a pretty clear and convincing victor in that election. There were several reasons for that. I think one of them that helped tip the scales was that the governor of the state at the time, a guy named Craig Benson, he was a Republican, but he said things like, I usually have more in common with libertarians than Republicans. And he signed up as a friend of the Free State Project and welcomed us to the state and basically lobbied us to choose New Hampshire. So that was a welcome that we didn't get it anywhere else, and I think that made a difference to some people. New Hampshire, of course, also has a very low state and local tax burden with no general state sales or income tax. The total state and local tax burden in New Hampshire right now is 8%. Here in New York, it's close to 14%. So if you want a 6% more of your income in your pocket, you can get that right away by moving to New Hampshire. New Hampshire also has a lot of the personal freedoms that some other states lack. It's not perfect there, but we've seen lots of freedoms retained or advanced in New Hampshire. New Hampshire, just as a small example, New Hampshire is the only state in the country where it is legal as an adult not to wear a seatbelt. So if you're over 18, you don't have to wear a seatbelt. But also in New Hampshire, we've seen things like same-sex civil unions and same-sex marriage pass. In the 2011-2012 legislative session, this was after the Republican wave election of 2010, Republicans gained a 3/4 majority in the state House and an 80% majority in the state Senate. And everyone said, well, same-sex marriage is going to be repealed. They're going to do that because that's the Republican Party platform. They're conservative. That's what they're going to do. But what they didn't count on was a large libertarian caucus in the legislature. Free staters since 2003, when we chose New Hampshire, have started to move to New Hampshire. Over 1,000 people are already in the state, and many of them have gotten elected. We now, as of right now, we have 11 confirmed Free State Project members who are elected state representatives. In the 2011-2012 session, we had a dozen Free Staters who were in the State House and one who was in the State Senate. And in addition to that, they helped put together a caucus called the Natural Rights Council within the State House that had about 70 members. This is in a State House of 400, but still that's almost 20% of the State House joining an explicitly libertarian caucus. And they opposed the repeal of same-sex marriage and defeated it overwhelmingly. They also got the Republican-dominated State House to pass marijuana decriminalization, to overwhelmingly pass medical marijuana. Unfortunately, the Democratic governor vetoed medical marijuana. The state Senate defeated marijuana decriminalization. But medical marijuana is going to happen now. The new governor, who's also a Democrat, favors it. And the majorities in the state legislature there, it's already been passed overwhelmingly in the House. So that is also going to New Hampshire. So what has been the influence of the Free State Project in New Hampshire so far? That's something that's tough to measure. It's tough to measure exactly how Free Staters who've already moved in advance of their commitment have actually influenced state politics. But we can try. One I have, and unfortunately it's too bright in here to do slides, but I had this little graphic that's kind of neat. And it shows per capita donations, actually as a percentage of state personal income, donations to the Ron Paul campaign in 2007-2008, and donations to Ron Paul and Gary Johnson in 2011-2012. And New Hampshire led the nation both times. New Hampshire gave the most to both of those campaigns in 2008 and 2012, even beating out Gary Johnson's home state of New Mexico. In addition, I did some statistical analysis on the Ron Paul primary. I first did this in 2008, and at the time I had access to the Free State Project member database, and so I was able to see what towns Free Staters lived in, and I got the election results town by town, and I found that in every town where there was one additional Free Stater living in that town, Ron Paul got 2 more votes. So it looks as if it's not just that Free Staters are voting a certain way, but they're starting to have influence on their neighbors. In addition to that, I would look at the 2012 primary. Now, by all means, not every libertarian supported Ron Paul, but it's still an indication of how the political influence of Free Staters is playing out. Before the 2012 primary, I wrote a short piece for this magazine called The American Conservative, forecasting how Ron Paul would do in the New Hampshire primary. And I said, I basically tried to look at what I extrapolated the influence of Free Staters to be, as well as his standing in the polls. And I said, if Free Staters basically have no influence on the New Hampshire primary, but Ron Paul gets a boost consistent with his national boost in the polls since 2008, he would get about 15% in the 2012 New Hampshire primary. On the other hand, at the high end, if Free Staters have sort of the maximum level of influence that I expect, and none of their influence is currently reflected in the polling I had at the time, then he could get up to 30%. 3%, right in the mid-range of those. But it was an outstanding outcome. It was by far his best performance in any primary, excluding caucuses. As a percentage of the electorate, Ron Paul got more votes by far in New Hampshire than any other state. So we're starting to see whether or not you support Ron Paul or not, or any of these specific ideas, we're beginning to see measurable impact of Free Staters on the political climate in New Hampshire. I'll also mention some legislation that Free Staters have sponsored themselves, where we can definitely say, well, a Free Stater did that. If it hadn't been for that person, that would not have happened. In the 2011-2012 legislative session, we saw several legislative accomplishments. So here are some bills that Free Staters who were elected to the legislature actually wrote and lobbied for and got passed by the legislature, signed by the governor, and enacted into law. One was total knife liberalization. So, small thing, but removing all regulations on the ownership, sale, carrying, and possession of knives. Legalization of micro and nano breweries. So also something with a measurable economic impact, and that was a bill written by a Free Stater who I believe owns his own nano brewery. Homeschool laws were also liberalized. New Hampshire, I think, is slightly above average, is slightly better than average in its homeschool laws because of this effort. It still has a way to go to where I would prefer New Hampshire's laws to be, but it's definitely much more relaxed than, say, New York. And that's one reason why my wife and I are definitely moving to New Hampshire. We want to homeschool our daughter, who's 2 now. Jury nullification, a bill passed, was enacted into law that codifies the principle of jury nullification and instructs judges that they may not mislead jurors about their right. If the defense requests, the judge has to tell the jury that they have this right to nullify. And I believe that's a first in the nation law as well. There's other legislation that passed with the help of porcupines. Porcupines is sort of the informal term for Free Staters and their kind of local allies. It's hard to say whether porcupines were decisive to these laws, but they nevertheless played a role. The 2011-2012 legislature cut the budget by 11%. That's in just pure dollar terms. That's not percentage of the economy or anything else or projected growth. That's a real 11% cut. They cut the university budget by 48%. Imagine trying to do that in New York. I'm not very popular in my department when I applauded what they did do, which was much smaller than that. Back when Real ID was an issue, and some states actually went ahead and implemented Real ID with biometric identifiers on on driver's licenses and retaining of birth certificates and other private information at DMV offices. New Hampshire opted out of that and was one of the first states to do so in this Real ID rebellion of the states, and that was definitely led in part by porcupines. I've already mentioned same-sex partnerships, the role that libertarians played in that. Also, another small thing, but an important economic regulation. This was worked on in part by Porcupine co-sponsors, a bill that repealed the certificate of need requirement for new hospitals. So one small regulation, but it will help bring down healthcare costs in New Hampshire. Just one quotation. This is Charlie Arlinghouse, who's a New Hampshire native and a longtime political commentator. He also heads up the Josiah Bartlett Center for Public Policy in New Hampshire. This is just a quote I pulled from a column he wrote in 2012 for the Union Leader. He called the legislature the most libertarian-leaning legislature there ever was. Then he said, it probably ever will be. We aim to prove him wrong about that last part, and I think we will see that. So I think the Free State Project is making history. We don't need to outvote everybody else. We're not going to take over New Hampshire, but we just need a few thousand skilled, knowledgeable activists to bring new policy ideas into the conversation, and the ideas of liberty will win out, I think. Once people are exposed to them, once they understand the arguments, we can win, and we're starting to see that here in New Hampshire. So I and my family are participating. We're going to be moving to New Hampshire this summer, finally, and so we're very much looking forward to that. So for more information, you can check out our website, freestateproject.org. I also have statements of intent. I'd like to see everyone in this room sign up. You don't have to move until we reach 20,000 signatures, and we're only at 15,000 right now, and aim to get to 20,000 in 2 years. So that's our aim right now. And once that happens, you have 5 years to move. So we're talking 7 years at least to move. So feel free to sign up. I will have these, and I'd love to get your questions.
Would you happen to have the exact wording of the jury notification?
Yeah, I don't have that on hand. So yeah, I couldn't give that to you. I do know that it has been used in the courtroom. There was a recent case that went national where one of the jurors was a Free Stater who moved to New Hampshire, and whom I know very well. Met her in South Carolina, and she propounded nullification. It was a case of someone who grew pot at home, and he was let off, and it ended up making national news because of this bill. She was able to tell the jurors, look, this is legal. This is something that the legislature has passed.
Are there particular areas in the state where libertarians are especially concentrated that it's strategically wise to move here?
Yeah, there are some places. Now, there's a bit of a strategic divide in the group. I'll call it a divide, but we're pretty much on friendly terms with each other. But there are people who are more into civil disobedience and that kind of thing, and those who are more into electoral action and lobbying the legislature. So for civil disobedience, the headquarters is certainly Keene, New Hampshire. That's where you get Free Talk Live. Ian and Mark run Free Talk Live out of Keene, and we've seen lots of instances of sort of confrontation between police and Free Staters on things like smoking marijuana in public and things like that. So if you're into that, that's in Keene. There's also a group who have focused on Grafton, a small town, in an effort to turn that into a free town. Grafton is already fairly free in many respects. It doesn't have any zoning. They abolished their building inspector. So they don't supposedly the state requires towns to issue building permits for things, but they don't actually do that in Grafton anymore. So Grafton is a place where about 30 Free Staters have moved, and they're starting to make a difference in local elections. Another place that I would mention is Croydon, which is an even smaller town than Grafton, but is close by. just a few hundred people, and libertarians control the school board there and are implementing school choice. Croydon, Croydon. Jody Underwood and the Bardo Farm folks are there.
You also got that big donor there, the Blue Mountain Preservation Organization, a big private hunting grounds.
That's
that
right.
owns most of the town.
Yeah,
Yeah.
that's right.
What's the average cost of housing over there, and what about the cost of living? I know it's cheaper than New York, obviously.
Yeah. It's much cheaper than New York City, but actually significantly more expensive than Buffalo. So, you know, in Buffalo, you pay, what would it be, like for a 1,500 square foot house, you'd probably not pay more than $125,000. In New Hampshire, you'd probably pay more like $200,000 for that house. I'm not sure exactly what it would be in Manhattan, but it's...
What about the cost of living, though?
Yeah, the cost of living in New Hampshire is going to be higher than it is in Western New York and Ohio and Kansas and places like that, but significantly lower than Connecticut, Massachusetts, downstate New York, New Jersey, places like that.
Yeah. Did Cynthia Chase, now of course she may hit a real monkey app or something, but the question is, she was the one who wanted to chase out the Free Staters by passing laws deliberately to make it uncomfortable, to infringe. She said, we need to infringe. Okay. Now, the question is, did she get any traction, or was she just seen as a cartoon character that, well, you answered.
Yeah, I mean, I think her comments didn't play well in the media, and Republicans made hay of it. She said she wanted to take away freedoms so that Free Staters wouldn't move to New Hampshire anymore. But she got support from another state rep later, Peter Burling, and I think she expresses the views of a lot of the hard left in New Hampshire. And, you know, frankly, I thought it was disappointing that the Democratic Party in New Hampshire attacked the Free State Project when we chose the state. They issued a press release saying we were anti-family and all this. You know, we have lots of things where we share common ground with Democrats, but they were not willing to pay much heed to us. I think in the New England context, Democrats are just plain old nanny staters, most of them. You know, they want to ban smoking, they want to ban everything that's bad for you, they want to raise taxes, and they're just statists. What's that?
Puritans.
Puritans.
Point of information, though, she was a recent mover to the state. She moved from Rhode Island recently.
That's right.
So she wasn't even from New Hampshire.
Yeah. So. And Republicans are, you know, there's not a really strong social conservative element in the Republican Party at all. So the Republicans are almost like the libertarian-ish part, the moderate libertarian party in New Hampshire.
You know, the natural migration of people, has there been like the freedom culture been diluted because the migration pattern of people moving into an area that may not be disposed to that particular idea? Idaho, a state like Idaho comes to mind. I have family out there. And
Yeah,
it's
people. Right. You know, people ask whether Massachusetts people moving to New Hampshire has changed its political culture, and definitely if you look at presidential election results, say New Hampshire used to be strongly conservative. At least they were very pro-Reagan. He did very well there in '84.
He did
Bush
well
in-
everywhere.
Yeah, that's true. That's true. But you know, it was a total landslide in New Hampshire, and they now are just maybe about a percentage point more democratic than the national average. It's really right on the edge. They're a centrist state. But what we found is that the places where Massachusetts people have moved, right along the border with Massachusetts, are some of the most conservative spots in the state. And it's the area along the border with Vermont that's moved more left. Now, whether that means that that has changed the culture in a way that's bad for libertarians is another question, because those areas along the border with Vermont also gave Ron Paul his best performance in the primary. So I think there's, I think the culture and political in New Hampshire is centrist right now. It's, in the left-right sense, it's centrist, but leaning libertarian. And so that's a good opportunity for us, I think, not to be too tied to either left-wing or right-wing. You know, it's an opportunity to have some of both the social freedoms and the economic freedoms. So long as it doesn't become Massachusetts or Vermont or Maine, I'm fine with that.
I think there are some people who are of the impression that economic
scientist and aware of the surrounding economic conditions in the western part of the state. Do you see anything like that? And if not, why?
Well, I think what we've seen is that people who look for something new leave Western New York. There's a lot of political hopelessness and apathy in that part of the state. I mean, there have been people who tried to do things, especially in the mid-2000s when Buffalo went bankrupt and Erie County went bankrupt. But it kind of died out. There's just in pretty much throughout this state, there's a strong political class, an entrenched political class, and it's very difficult to dislodge them. And for that reason, people in Western New York think, well, Albany's a lost cause, you know, why bother? And so the ones who don't like the way things are going just leave, and that's why the population's been dropping so much. It's worth pointing out that this is one advantage of New Hampshire, the fact that you know, state reps make $100 a year, state senators make $200 a year. It's a citizen legislature. It's very easy to get elected to the state house if you put in a little work. About $2,000 and some work, some elbow grease will get you a state house seat if you keep at it. So it's not like there's not that kind of entrenched political class where there's just so much money and there's so much you know, professionalism, I guess, you know, in a bad sense in the state legislature, where these are career politicians who know their game and will crush you if you cross them. Oh. Other questions? The unemployment rate is below the national average. I think it's 5.5% or something. So the employment situation is good compared to the rest of the country. So it's,
that's an aggregate, but
yeah.
What about what jobs are in demand?
Yeah. New Hampshire tends to be strong in manufacturing, in information technology. A lot of Free Staters who've moved are people with flexible jobs like web developers who can, you know, do work remotely. But there's also this sort of high-tech corridor along Route 128 that's extended up into New Hampshire. So in Nashua and areas like that, you'll get a lot of high-tech firms. If you do something like, you know, if you do something like process engineering or warehouse management or things like that, there are jobs all over the place in New Hampshire. If you do something, if you're like a K through 12 teacher, it's going to be more difficult. That's an area that's come under strain lately.
Coming out of an investment banking background, you can easily get to Boston for work. That's why the Southern Tier has so many conservative Republicans, because they're the portfolio managers from State Street and all the banking firms in Boston that are moving just over the border to beat the income tax.
Finances.
45 years in there. I used to live up there.
Go right out of Exeter, towards the north side, and that train goes down.
Yeah, I would say that it definitely skews that way. We have lots of IT people who've moved as part of the FSP. You know, various parts of that equation.
You're an academic.
Yeah, I'm an academic, so I'm one of the least mobile jobs that you could ever think of. But I do have a job that's lined up. We don't want to say what it is, because if it gets out, you know, the Cynthia Chases of the world are going to try to get me fired.
Just so you know, Dr. Soberger taught mathematics at SUNY New Paltz for about 30 years. So,
Yeah, well, so
he's
you
got a
know.
lot of experience.
I mean,
We
as
have
an
time for 2 more
okay.
questions.
So, speaking as a libertarian and political scientist, if you were to advise Mark Axinn about where to put his resources in New York as opposed to New Hampshire,
Both dollars.
where do you think it would be best invested
Mm-hmm.
in New York?
In New York.
Yes.
I don't. That's probably beyond my pay grade. I'm not, I do.
LPNY.
Yeah. One of the things I do is Freedom in the 50 States, which is this index of personal and economic freedom in the 50 states, as published by the Mercatus Center at George Mason, and we just came out with our new edition. I think a pretty good investment strategy, if you're looking just in terms of geography, is to look at states that have improved a lot recently, because that's where that the improvement in the investment environment might not yet be arbitraged away in terms of the profits that are available to you.
I'm
So,
not talking about
yeah.
profit, I'm talking about political investment.
Oh,
In
political.
New York State.
In New York State, ugh. Probably local level, town level politics. I mean, committed people can make a difference. You just need a small group of people who are willing to, push an issue. Start with a wedge issue, some sort of local wedge issue, like something that's popular, like maybe the abuses at the local jail or something like that. Eminent domain.
How about county sheriffs that are liberty-minded, because county sheriffs can decide not to enforce federal laws?
They can try to do that, but I would that's tough. I mean, that sets up a fight. I would say start with something that's popular, where you've got broad-based support, and then build from that. Get some victories in your column, and that gets people energized. That gets past the apathy, and that's what we've had to deal with in Buffalo and haven't been able to get past.
Okay, great. Jason Sorens.